Hey, so this is going to be the first in a series of videos that I'm going to make, a little kind of short-lived series talking about the advanced concepts and theories of Korean traditional archery and how they are correlated actually with some of the theory taught today for modern archery, especially under the KSL shot cycle. I'm really making this series just for the sake of having continued conversations with my friends because I've been getting questions on this kind of stuff and asking for further clarification. So, guys, if you're listening, watching, please don't expect any kind of amazing editing and audio work and lighting and all that kind of stuff. Or it's just gonna be old school, kind of just throw up a camera vlog style. So there's gonna be some jumpy editing and whatever. I'll try to at least edit it to make it somewhat bearable to watch, but please understand it's not gonna be perfect. But I hope this series does help answer some of the questions you guys have been asking me. And yeah, that's what this is gonna be about. So let's get started. So today we're going to be talking about back tension. So back tension for most archers and coaches, I think when you think about the term, most people will just go, oh yeah, you got to squeeze the shoulder blades or the scapula to the spine, right? That's what most people think. Well, that may be the most common form of back tension, but actually from a biomechanical standpoint, that isn't the only form of back tension. In fact, there's tons and tons of forms of back tension, okay? Because the definition of back tension, at least from like an anatomical standpoint, is really just the position of your scapula or shoulder blades in relationship to the spine and the rib cage. That's all it really is, okay? And so, as one might imagine, the shoulder blades can move a lot. So there's more than just that squeeze style back tension that everybody seems to be familiar with. The form of back tension that I'm going to talk to you today about is one of those alternative methods, which is known as transfer to hold under the KSL shot cycle process. I discovered in my studies of the Korean historical sources in regards to the more military style of archery that I can't say 100% for sure, but it's likely, given their descriptions of the movement processes, that this is the style of back tension that at least some forms of Korean historical, like Warbow archery, that they were using back then. And so I've opted, at least for the traditional KTA side, to call it Korean asymmetric back tension, because for some reason that seems to stick in people's minds. So basically, this is what it is. Rather than squeeze, like if this is your spine, right? Rather than squeezing your shoulder blades to the spine, right? Instead, what we're doing is pushing the bow arm out to its maximum range of motion, to the point where the bow arm side shoulder blade actually pushes away from the spine as far as it can comfortably go, to the maximum range of motion. Also, we are only moving the drawing side scapula into the spine throughout the shot process, especially during the draw cycle, because it creates a situation where, due to the fact that, again, if this is the spine, both shoulder blades are like this, they're both moving in the same direction towards the target. So the actual like back tension crease, instead of being here, ends up out in front of the spine, creating this extreme look of asymmetry. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, that sounds like nonsense. Bear with me, I will show you photos later explaining how all this kind of works. But for now, just understand that's what it is. Why is it called transfer to hold though in the modern day? Because actually it's an incredibly good description of what happens. So for those of you who are learning NTS or KSL or whatever and have been kind of confused about this terminology, maybe what I'm about to say might help you. In conventional back tension theory, when you squeeze the shoulder blades together, the greatest point of tension is felt right in the middle of the spine, or in other words, in your back. Hence the term back tension, because the idea is like, okay, the bow is pushing you back like this, and you pull the string back like this, and you have to be like in the middle of the bow, and those two pressures are like squeezing in on you, and you have to hold that, right? That's what conventional back tension theory is. There's kind of multiple ways to get there, because again, there's many different forms of back tension, but that's the gist of it. In this transfer to hold method, what we're basically doing is this. When you go through the rest of the shot cycle, especially noting that you need to set the barrel of the gun, which is basically a fancy way of saying shoulder alignment, setting this shoulder alignment so there's a straight line from the back drawing side joint all the way to the bow hand wrist. Okay, that needs to be an absolutely straight line. Set up, load, anchor, transfer. The reason why we need to set that alignment is because when combined with the scapula motions positions that I just described, right, it creates a very interesting effect. As you draw the bow back, right, the string comes back, the limbs bend, you feel the force of the limbs. That force goes down into the string, up your drawing arm, set up, and during loading, gets loaded into the back. But because in this method, right, we have both our shoulder blades going in the same direction, the momentum doesn't stop at the spine, but actually transfers from the back, up the bow arm, out the pressure point, back into the bow. In other words, we're using the force of the bow and redirecting or transferring it back into itself. Really, it's a counterbalancing method. With that understanding out of the way, what is the hold part, right? Well, the hold part is analogous to the Korean traditional term manjak. Now, manjak, when directly translated, means full draw, and the concept of full draw is not unique to Korea, but I think all the cultures that use that term interpret it in a little bit of a different way. I'm going to explain to you the way the Koreans have interpreted that terminology and adapted it to their shot processes, okay? Full draw manjak, or holding, is basically the state of equilibrium. As I mentioned, the force of the bow comes from the limbs down the string, up the draw arm, gets loaded into the back, and then transferred back into the bow due to the pressure point, right? Well, if you think about it, every archer knows that when you're drawing the bow, you feel the force of the bow pushing back against you at the grip, right? Well, supposing you were shooting, say, 40 pounds, 60 pounds, 100 pounds, it really doesn't matter what the poundage is, okay? But since we're talking about warbows, let's say it's 100 pounds, right? Supposing that you're drawing 100 pounds. Well, if you load that 100 pounds into your back and then transfer that 100 pounds back into the bow's pushing you back like this with 100 pounds. 100 pounds is going to come this way. When those two forces meet, they're going to equalize each other. That exact moment of equalization, you will feel, and as weird as this might sound, you will feel all of a sudden that the bow just gets like lighter. Almost like the let off on a compound bow, although not that extreme. We're not going from 100 to like 20 pounds. It's gonna feel maybe 5 or 10 pounds lighter perceptually. That's not because the bow is actually getting lighter. It's more of a placebo effect. So again, I understand that concept for some folks, especially in the traditional world, might seem very, very foreign. So I will show you some photos now. So guys, this is what I wanted to show you. This is Coach Kissick Lee's second book, Total Archery Inside the Archer. And here you see something interesting here, right? Notice where the base of the spine and the neck are, okay? So that if we drew a straight line from here to here, okay, that the back tension crease is actually in front of the spine, and it looks as though this the drawing side scapula has overlapped the spine. This right here, okay, this structure is what we're going for, at least in the current interpretation variant that I am working on. This is what I meant when I talk about Korean asymmetric back tension. And Coach Kissick Lee is not going to like that term because he's going to be very adamant about the fact that he's teaching a biomechanical method, not a Korean method. This is true. But I think human anatomy being human anatomy, based on what I can glean away from the historical text source that I'm studying at the moment, as far as my Korean military archery is concerned, it seems to imply that the movement patterns are incredibly similar to the KSL shot cycle. And if they genuinely are, it will end up achieving this position. Okay? Now, this position, as I mentioned earlier, is achieved by having the bow arm scapula out away from the spine to its maximum extension for your given range of movement. The drawing side scapula is then brought in as close to the spine as you can possibly manage it based on your range of motion, okay? Note also that if you look at where the arm is, that this, I'll show you a close-up in a bit, but this is not at release. This is at anchor transfer holding, okay? So Coach Lee, in his book, does elaborate a little more. In regards to this kind of back tension structure, again, this is where the spine connects into the neck. Spine connects into the base right here. Back tension creases in front of the spine, right? But notice what it says. Forward positioning of the scapula creates room for expansion. This is talking to again, the bow arm shoulder blade is not anywhere close to the spine. Notice what it says. In the past, archers have been taught to hold the bow arm scapula back and down, meaning like this way to the spine. Essentially, in this variant of the transfer to hold method, we are literally doing the opposite of that. So the arm should be pushed to the maximum forward position. In the past, archers have been taught to hold the bow arm scapula back and down. However, doing so creates a limited range of motion or possibly impingement for angular drawing and expansion. Pushing the bow arm forward as much as possible creates the necessary space while still providing the most stable and repeatable position. Before learning this method, and I used the more conventional squeeze method, I ended up hurting both my shoulders. Now, here's that close-up I promised from earlier. Again, notice the asymmetry, right? But I want to also mention one additional thing here, okay? So this archer here has redirected the force of the bow, loaded into the back, and has transferred the force back into the bow through the pressure point, as we talked about, right? Now, I want to talk about another question I've been asked. Sometimes people ask me, well, if the shoulder blades are like this, right, how do you brace the bow vertically? Like, isn't the bow arm supposed to go up like at this angle? And I say, well, no, because we'll get more into this when we talk about alignment structure, but in the Korean systems, traditional or modern or otherwise, you want a straight line from this back shoulder all the way to the front shoulder like this. See, this needs to be straight. If this arm goes in any other direction, it's no longer going to be straight. But our vertical brace comes from the positioning of the shoulder blades relative to the tension line that it creates when we transfer. So notice how actually the draw side scapula is a little lower than the bow arm scapula. But despite that, the bow arm shoulder is not crunching up like this. You can see that very deep notch right here because the shoulder blade here wraps around, forming the head of the shoulder joint known as the rotator cuff, and above that is connected into the collarbone, which wraps around to the front. That collarbone is touching that upper rib and is as low as it's going to go. It cannot go any lower. So this being down like that, which is possible to create, again, if we use that asymmetric structure where we push the bow arm scapula forward, this will just naturally happen. You don't really have to force this, mind you. So our brace doesn't come from here to here. It comes from here all the way to here. Just like our alignment braces from here to here. Our vertical alignment braces from here all the way to here. That's also why you have to feel that tension right here. Okay? Because if this part is slack, it will loosen this line. So that's what it's showing right here by this shaped thing right here. Okay? The tension line. Okay? While the drawing side scapula rotates like this way towards the viewer. Okay? So, due to the angular drawing. So now that we went over the photos and you guys know that I'm not just making this up, right? Um, well, I'm not gonna do all the full citation stuff right now because I don't want to edit all this in, especially for this just preview series. The reason why I think that the Korean traditional historical method, at least one variant of it, the variant that I'm studying and trying to reconstruct, uses this method specifically is because when I was reading the text source, there is a mention of, first of all, the drawing unit, but specifically the elbow in the case of the historical manual, mentioning that you cannot make sure that the elbow does not drop, but as you draw the bow back, it goes around you like this, more horizontally, okay, relatively speaking. I mean, like more towards your back this way. That's the same movement pattern as the angular drawing style in the KSL shot cycle. It also mentions something kind of weird that it took me a moment to really get, but it mentions that in regards to the torso, that the armpit of the left side, in other words, the bow arm side, needs to feel expanded or extended. At first when I read that, I was kind of like, what? And then it eventually dawned on me that because the shoulder blade, right, is part of the armpit structure, the only way for it to feel expanded is to reach out and push like this, just like we do in the KSL shot cycle, which means that the shoulder blade has to move away from the spine like this. That right there, while I agree there are other ways that you can possibly interpret that, at least to me, from like an anatomical standpoint, that was really the only way I can make sense of it. And considering that in my own personal testing that it does work incredibly well with high poundage bows so long as I have the physical conditioning to keep my health and safety up, right? I couldn't really see any other way to do it than to do it that way. This method, to my current experiences, having worked with many students before and applying it to myself, is really the best way of using back tension that we have discovered thus far. Now, this video, because it's a theory video, I'm not really going to explain how to do that as part of the actual draw cycle just yet, because people are going to be like, well, how do you do it then, right? Well, I'll get to that. We have to first talk about alignment, we have to talk about posture, we have to talk about all the stuff necessary to allow that to be achieved. But suffice to say, if there's any one thing that I want people to remember that the Korean asymmetric back tension method, or transfer to hold, is about using the force of the bow against itself. I hope conceptually that makes sense.